Let's start with changing meaning. Let's focus on reframing and relational family themes for a bit. Think about how it goes when you get a case. As I've talked about before, information comes to you not about the people, but information comes to you about the referring problem, or what we might call the presenting problem. Now, what's really important to know is that that behavior, bad as it might be, is relatively neutral. And the problem here are the ideas and the meaning that gets constructed around that problem. Now, all attributions, or what we call problem definitions, have three components. First of all, when you are confronted with a problem, you look to see who and what caused it. When you can identify who and what, those kinds of the meaning you put on it has an emotion connected to it, and it has related behavioral patterns to respond to the meaning that you've put onto the problem. Let me take this one step further and show you how it works in a family. So remember this notion of problem definition. It is the notion that every one of us has ideas about the problem, and it is those ideas, as opposed to the problem itself, that probably cause the most struggle within relationships. Think about it for a second. You know what? Whenever something occurs to any one of us, it's quite natural to try to make meaning of it. And so, that meaning isn't probably particularly accurate, in the sense that the meaning that each of us put on these problems is affected by what our unique experiences are. You may be particularly worried and scared about alcohol use, if particularly you've come from a family in which that was very problematic. A number of examples like that exist. It also, the meaning you put on the problem also comes from your past experience with it. Something that comes up just once, it probably doesn't have the same meaning as something in which you have a long history of the problem. But what is really important to remember is that the problem presented by the client is their idea of the problem, not the problem itself, and that there's nothing the matter with it. In fact, it is a natural and normal way that we all respond to things, trying to make sense in order to be able to solve it. Now, the issue in family treatment is the issue I've talked about before, is there are as many problem definitions as there are people in the family. So while the event, the series of events, or the experiences that they're all responding to may be the same, they could all have very different ideas about the problem in that event. And as a result, each of them probably feels very misunderstood. They feel very blamed. They think the other is the problem. And working, if you're thinking that way, then you're probably likely working to different solutions. For example, the adolescent may be working to try to get their parents out of their life, while the parents are working to become more involved. It's because they see and experience different problems. Therefore, the implication is it's not the detail of the problem that's most important. It is the way in which it makes meaning for the family. Now, the reason that that's really helpful for us in a program like FFT is it helps us understand what we're trying to change. So instead of taking and looking at the details of what happened, I want to focus my attention on what that meaning that they place on those events, because that's the most powerful part. And that, if you can change it, will make the most difference. So at the end of the day, our goal is to actually redefine the presenting problem. Because we're not changing the event, we're just changing the meaning that they put on the event. And the goal is to redefine it away from a blaming one to something in which they all share, in which they're all part of it. And it's what we call a family-focused problem definition. And what makes it different is that it's not any one of their meanings. It's not any one of their problem definitions. It's common to all of them. It includes all of them. No one is to blame. Everyone has responsibility. So the therapeutic challenge and the skill that we need to identify is, what can we do in discussions between parents, caregivers, and youth as they're talking about difficult issues, problems, events that have occurred? How is it that we can respond in a way that helps promote this family-focused problem definition? Because if we can, we'll build alliance, we'll reduce blame, and we'll reduce negativity. That is where the skill lies in the beginning of treatment. If we can accomplish that, they'll be more motivated. As I said, negativity will be reduced. There'll be family to family alliance. And in effect, you'll also have the therapeutic alliance that you need to work. The skill to promote that is what we call relational reframing. And it's important that you know that this is not a static thing that you do, but instead, relational reframing is a response that you make whenever anyone in the family presents their, quote, problem definition as the discussion about the presenting concern goes on. Your goal here is to respond in a way that if it fits, you add something new to what they said. You add by reframing and by identifying and promoting relational themes, you provide an alternative explanation to the problem in the event that they're struggling with. And that reframe or that way of responding is important that it suggests that the event is solvable, that it requires all of them, and that the problem is not the behavior, but the problem is the behavior, not the person, and that behavior comes from the noble intention of the other. So reframing blame and negativity when a family member presents a problem definition is what relational reframing is about. Let's look at how this works. So again, your goal is in the early discussions around what has happened and what's the problem in the family, you want to try to make this problem solvable enough that you build hope, you build engagement, and you pull the family into the treatment process. So it begins this way. When someone raises an issue, you need to respond to them before the pattern and the sequence between them develops. And you need to respond directly to the person and first identify the behavior that's important to them. If it is that the boy was disrespectful or that the girl withdrew or that the youth ran away, start by calling it and identifying it. Say, I understand that this is important to you. And then kind of immediately acknowledge what's difficult, that it's painful, that it's hard, and identify that it is a legitimate concern to have and that you're clear about what behavior they're concerned about. What's important is that almost immediately after doing that, you do what we call a reframe. That reframe is to say and present an alternative explanation so that you can then listen to see how the family responds. And that's where you're going to listen for the impact. Did it make a difference what you said? Did they follow you into a less blaming position? Did they push back with you because it didn't fit? And then you have a decision to make about what to add to what you started with so that you can make it fit the client better. And then it becomes very much like a round and around and around process where clients will respond and identify something new. They'll identify a behavior. And in telling you that, they will give you their problem definition. You're going to respond with an alternative idea about the intention of that behavior, identifying the noble intention. You're going to listen. How did they respond? What did they hear? What didn't fit? What did fit? And then you're going to make a decision about how to keep going. Try to listen for what they added to what you said. Try to listen for what you might have missed. Add those and build on to what you started with so that you can go around the cycle again, identifying that behavior, acknowledging, reframing, and again, around and around as the family discusses the problem. Now, the reason and the ways in which this is helpful is that you are redirecting the family each time they talk about something to a new way of looking at it, which is what will change the meaning of that event or that situation for the client. So you have to be active. You have to not wait till they're totally done. Sometimes interrupt, sometimes break the sequence of what goes on between them, speak directly to people, and to be very clear. The goal here is to lead them to think about the problem in a way that feels solvable. And that it will feel solvable as they feel less blamed and less negative. They will build hope. It's important to remember that this reframing process is not some sterile skill. It is a very respect-based process, and this is a reason that it works. And what I mean by that is you need to begin not with the alternative idea, but you need to begin by showing the client, showing the youth, showing the caretaker that you do understand. That is what it takes. You have to demonstrate that so that they'll follow you into the alternative perspective. We call that saying yes. And if you think about it a little bit, respect-based reframing is really sort of a way of speaking in which first out of the box, you go, you know what, that's exactly right, yes. And you follow it with an and to make a transition to reframing. Let me show you how this works. So acknowledging what they said, or the yes part, means that you show them very clearly that what just got said is important. You hear it, it's important, and you know what it's connected to. And that helps frame the situation or the problem. So you're saying, it is this thing that my next statement or my reframe is intended to give you a different perspective on. So it's got to be very specific. Yeah, this is what happens. And it has to identify the event, the emotion, or the behavior so that you're very, very clear. A second part of the acknowledgement is not just to describe what happened, but to describe in your best, very sometimes informed, sometimes far less informed, guess about what's important to them. So for example, frequently for a parent, something is important because being a good parent is important. Sometimes an event is important because they really care about the other person. Sometimes it's important because they have a background that makes them particularly susceptible to that, and that's important to honor. Sometimes your ideas about this may come from something you've heard them say. Sometimes you may assume, but you need to look to make it more and more and be able more and more to show them that it's not just the event, but it's something that they brought to this event that makes it difficult for them. Not in a blaming way, but in a descriptive way. So step one is a yes. Step two is the and part. And remember, as we all know from our human interactions, yes and is a much easier way to work with somebody than a yes but. The and part is what you're adding to the conversation. And remember, you should and do add information to conversations that clients did not bring into the room. It is okay to do that and important to do that. What you're adding, however, is the key. You're not adding your values. You're not adding your opinion. You're adding an alternative meaning for the event and the situation and the important things that you acknowledged in step one. You might think of this as what is behind the behavior or the response, or the noble reason or noble intention. Now, when you reframe, it has to be non-blaming. No one caused it. It's just an alternative description that's not really interpretive, and it doesn't explain away or excuse what happened. It describes it. So, for example, you may reframe a youth's, passionate responses to their parents' directions about what to do. That could be an angry response, as a passionate response, as the youth is trying to find a way to work things out with their parents. So it isn't that you're excusing it away. It is that you're describing it in a way that gives the youth the best possible noble intention, that makes it solvable and that builds hope. Now remember, it's important to know that reframes begin as a real guess. They're truly a guess. And in fact, as we move along, you'll see we have some core ones to rely on. And it comes from what you've heard. It comes from what you know is common to adolescents. But over time, this guess, as you go around and around the circle I described a minute ago, as you go around and around, the guess gets closer and closer to not being a guess, but to being an idea that fits. As you go around and add the parent, the caretaker, the youth together, these different reframing ideas build what we call a relational theme. It's a bit like braiding together the different threads of the youth, the caregiver, the mom, the dad, the sibling, into a comprehensive theme, or in this particular case, it would be a theme that would be a description that's more inclusive than the event, but it's about them. It involves everybody, and it talks about the ways in which their issues are important, their challenges are painful, but they're solvable and doable.